Good morning, everybody. My name is Brett Augustine. I'm a recovery business advisor for the North Central Texas Small Business Development Centers, which is a leading provider for assistance for small businesses. We are grant funded, which allows us to offer this and many other webinars and training at no cost to you. If you have any questions today, please, just a quick side note, we're going to put them in the chat box and go over them afterwards. Or if Miss Lorna Kibbe would like us to, we'll take them as she goes through her presentation. But please leave your questions in the chat box so we can get to them. And speaking of Miss Lorna Kibbe, for those of you who don't know her, she's an American Small Business Development Center conference speaker. And she's had 10 years experience working at the SBDC Florida Gulf Coast University. She's also known as a leadership expert. And we are so proud and happy to have her again to present today what makes a presentation effective. And with that, I give you Miss Lorna Kibbe.
Well, good morning. That was a quick intro there. I still do not have screen sharing, so I'd appreciate it if y'all turn that on for me so that I can share my screen. So have you ever been required to make a presentation in front of real people where you're like freaked out, maybe nervous? It's very common. I've done a lot of presentations and some have gone well, some have been good, and some have been downright embarrassing. But I've been doing it a long time and I've done a lot of presentations. And the interesting thing is, from every time I mess up, I learn something, plus watching other people in their presentations. So the series that we're about to do here, that we're starting right now, gives you a lot of insight as to what professionals do when they speak and what can help you to be better presenters. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One time I was very concerned about the way I looked because I thought, in my early days, it really mattered what I looked like. I wasn't really thinking so much about the audience. I was just thinking, how do I look? Do I look cool? So I wore, some pretty high-heeled shoes. And guess what? There were stairs going up. It was like an auditorium. Can you believe I fell up the stairs during the presentation? Talk about embarrassing. But you learn lessons, okay, maybe that wasn't a good idea, the whole high heel thing. Yeah, I don't do that anymore. Now I wear like wedges. One time I was doing a presentation that required a lot of PowerPoint. And the reason it required a lot of PowerPoint is because I needed it as a crutch, in my earlier days. So I was in Southwest Florida. And if you've been in Southwest Florida, they have these thunderstorms that happen like almost every day. And it's very common for the power to flicker on and off during these storms. Sure enough, there was a storm, which didn't make any sense. I couldn't plan for it because it happened in the morning and it's supposed to happen at 5 o'clock, but it happened in the morning. So the power starts flickering on and off. And every time it flickered, my heart's going, uh-oh, because all the tech goes down, right? Finally, it just went off completely. And I'm like, okay, well, this is it. We can't they're not going to want me to finish this presentation in the dark here. We have nothing and there's thunder and lightning, and they're like, oh, please go on. It's fine. I'm like, maybe it's fine for you, but I'm in trouble. But the good news is the lights came right back on. And I'm like, yay, I'm like, oh, it's going to be okay. But guess what? The PowerPoint never came back. They could never get the stuff back online, the tech, and it never came back. So there I was doing that presentation, counting on those slides to know what to say next. And I didn't have them anymore. That was a mistake too. I learned from that. So now I don't depend on my slides. These are just a few of the lessons learned. So we're ready to share screen. All right, I can do that. Thank you. So the truth is, you've probably done a lot of presentations and not even thought of them as presentations. And y'all can see my screen now. Brett, everything good? All right, fantastic. Not even thought of them as presentations, but honestly, in business, we do presentations almost daily. I mean, it doesn't require a big audience and a microphone. A presentation is any time that you're explaining to people how things work, or you're giving them information, you talk in front of people. In essence, you're giving a presentation. So it's not that uncommon. And if you feel nervous and you feel freaked out about the whole thing, you're not crazy. You're not alone. A couple of things that I've learned in researching for this, get this, 52% of people surveyed by USA Today said that they have actually passed on a career advancement opportunity because they felt like their presentation skills weren't strong enough to get them through that position. You believe that? 52% of people said that their presentation skills held them back. So if you're here today, this is good because we can help you with that. And of course, you know the other number, like over 90% of people say that they fear public speaking more than they fear death. And I can assure you that public speaking is not as bad as death. But what I've done is I've taken a lot of these tips and a lot of the information learned, a lot of the stories that I have, and I created a book, and that's really what the series is based on. But there's way too much information in this book to do in one session. So we have 6 sessions, and these are the sessions. So think now about, getting these on your calendar so you can get a lot of in-depth information on how to do presentations. Today, we're going to talk about how to make effective presentations. And then what you'll see in the following weeks is we're going to be doing some deep dives into these things so that you'll know exactly what to do. Like next time, we're going to do the 6-step formula for a solid, repeatable structure. This is something you'll be able to use over and over again. You'll never again struggle with how do I put this thing together. You'll know exactly what to do in 6 steps every time. And then we're going to talk about content. I'm going to give you a 5-part formula that's going to help you to be able to every time know exactly how to structure your content. So there's a lot more information here, a lot of deep diving that we're going to do. So just to let you know, these are coming, and I'm sure these are already up on the site, and you can check them out there and register for them. But today we're going to talk primarily about what makes a presentation effective. And, and this is what I miss about being in person. I wish we were in person so I could just hear what everybody thinks makes a presentation effective. Brett already told me what he thinks. He thinks that, if someone's sleeping, you should roll up a ball of paper and throw it at them. And that's not on my list, Brett. It's not, so I appreciate that tip. If anyone else has any tips about what they think, or what is your opinion of what makes a presentation effective, feel free to throw them in chat, because I'd love to see what everybody else thinks. But since you're not here with me, I'll tell you some of the things I'm thinking. If somebody asks me that question, the first thing I'm thinking is, I don't want to be bored. You feel the same way? I think a presentation has to keep me engaged and interested. I don't want to be bored with a presentation. And I don't know, have you ever been in a boring presentation? Probably, right? And you start thinking about other things and maybe doing other things. I used to go to some pretty awful presentations, so I have memories of that. Anyway, I digress. I want it to be memorable. I like an hour later, do I remember it? It's like when you read a good book and you can't get it off your mind, or you see a movie and 2 days later, you're still remembering things from that movie. I think it'd be really great if presentations were like that. If the information that I got there was so important to me and so memorable that I'm still thinking about it. Like 2 days later when I need it, do I remember it? That's sometimes I think a problem with presentations, because once the presentation's over, we don't use it, we don't remember it. So I think to be effective, it would be something that's really memorable. I like that one. I like to be motivated. I like to feel inspired. I like to feel like, wow, this is really something I can do. I guess I wanted to give me hope. I know I can do this. It gives me hope. I know exactly what to do next, and I know how to use this. So for me, that's something. Let's see, what else do I think makes a presentation effective? Let's see, ability to get information and not a lot of fluff. That's from NOSA. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I like for it to be succinct. It's interesting though. We have a problem with content, which we'll talk about in a few weeks, but the first-time presenters often stuff it way too full, way too full, so that they really don't give people time to reflect and take in information. They have too much content, but not enough content's not good either. So finding that right balance, and I have some tips for you about that in this series. So definitely, yeah, you don't want a lot of fluff. actually, no, you hit on something interesting, because what I'm finding with today's audiences is that we don't have a lot of time for goofing off right now. We've gotten pretty serious in our business lives, and most people, like if you play games or do activities that are not related to the content, they're not amused. They don't really have time to goof off. They come in, they want something, they want it fast, they want to be able to use it when they walk away, and they don't want to sit there and just hang out for 2 or 3 hours to get this much information. So you really hit on something interesting there. I like to be able to follow where they're going in the presentation. It bothers me when they jump from thing to thing and I'm not sure how they connect, and I can't follow really what's going to happen next. I'm not obsessive about that, but it's like, when is this going to be done? Like, how many points do you have anyway? I'd like for you just to tell me up front, like, give me some kind of structure, like how are we going to do this? I think that helps to make a presentation effective. I guess I could go on and on. I like for the speaker to be genuine and authentic. And I'm sure you have a lot of things that you can think about too. So what I've done with all this information is I've consolidated it into 5 must-dos. All right. And here are the 5 must-dos. I think it has to be actionable, engaging, interesting, organized, and you-focused. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. So you'll see that I used vowels, A-E-I-O-U. This is a memory technique, something to help you remember this later. There were 5 things that she said had to be done for it to be effective. And I know it's the vowels, so what are they? And I find myself right now, I'm prepping for this, I'm walking around the house going, A, actionable, E, engaging, so I can remember it. So if you really want to remember those things, this is a technique to help you remember. So actionable, engaging, interesting, organized, and you focused. What you're seeing now is called a foundational phrase. And this is really effective for presentations to help people to kind of, click the information. Stalling just a little bit gives you time to reflect and get in the zone with me, right? So working a little bit here to give you a little more, hopefully, as I go now into the main must-dos, you're with me, you're ready. Actually, maybe you're even excited for it. Just get on with it already, right? So I thought this was ingenious. So I got to read it to you. Words need vowels to break up the sounds that consonants make. Presentations need vowels to break up the boring that many presenters create. Isn't that just cute? But sometimes phrases like that really help people to remember. So what were those 5 things? It was letters, it was something. Oh, I remember it was vowels, because they break up the boring, right? So anything that you can do to help make it memorable for your audience. All right, so let's start with action. And with action, this really gets down to the purpose of the whole thing. I mean, why are you presenting this information? And what do you want your audience to do next? It's best for you to figure this out from the start. Why are you even doing this presentation? If you can't answer that question, then why are you doing a presentation? I mean, there needs to be a significant and a definable purpose. What's the point here that you're trying to make with me? Why are you doing this presentation? So if you can figure out why you're doing it, which you should be able to do, and you know the purpose, then the second question, of course, is why should I come? What do you want me to do after this? What action do you want me to be able to take? So you need to define that up front, because you're going to build your entire presentation on this action that you want me to take afterwards. And I think that really helps to make a presentation effective, because it begins to put us into the mode of targeting our audience, So, I mean, have you ever done a presentation or been in a presentation where it went great, but when it was over, it was just over? And that's what we're trying to avoid. I used to do, I do a lot of presentations on relationships and DISC. I'm a big fan of DISC. And for a long time I was doing them, and I was really frustrated because afterwards nothing would happen. I never got any follow through with people, and there was no buzz in the organization. And it's like, man, you're missing it. This is the best tool ever. And I was actually in a conference, and one of the presenters was talking about, following up after the session, and they asked a question. Duh. They said, what are you doing, Lorna? What are you doing to give them the steps they need to follow up? Like, me? Yeah, what are you doing? And I'm like, duh. I'm not really doing a good job of defining those next steps for them. I'm not really doing a good job of saying, here's what you do next. Here's how you carry it through. So I've gotten a lot better about that. I'm doing a 4-hour session and I'm getting no follow-up, no buzz. And now I'm doing a much better job of giving them a next step to take, the next thing you should do, the action that you should take afterwards. And I'm having a lot better success. And for me, success means that they're using that information to create a better workplace. So yeah, action, giving them that action. You actually, in the action thing, I'm going to say you need to give them a technique. You need to give them a way to apply it. You need to not leave that to chance, but give them maybe a checklist of things that you can do after the session to help you, or maybe have them create their own checklist as you go. Sometimes I do that. Make suggestions for them so that they can figure out what to do with the information that they're receiving. For example, maybe you just give them one next step and you build your whole presentation around getting the audience to take just that next step. So just one next step. What do you want your audience to think? What do you want them to feel after the presentation? If you give them more than one next step, which sometimes I do, but the thing that I run into with that is now they have to make a choice. And if they're confused about what choice they want to make, there's less likelihood they're going to take any action at all, right? So I really try to do, I tell them, here's what you need to do next. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to tell you, here's what you need to do next, all right? Sometimes I will ask them during the presentation, like let's say I have 3 or 4 main points. I'll pause actually after each point and say, write down one thing that you want to do next. And then what I do with that is at the very end of the presentation, in the closing, I'll have them choose one so that they actually create their own first next step, just one thing that you're going to do going forward. Sometimes in longer trainings, longer presentations, my last slide says one thing. And I go person by person and say, what's the one thing you're going to do next? So whatever you can do to give them some kind of a technique, some kind of an understanding, some kind of action step for what they're going to do with what they just learned. Otherwise, is the presentation effective at all if they don't do anything with it, right? So one next step, action. Next, I feel it has to be engaging. We have to constantly work to keep our audience involved in the presentation. People need to buy in so that they can help create their own reality, right? I think this involves really tuning into your audience and understanding what's going on with them, researching in advance who's going to be out there and maybe what their position is, especially if you're doing internal presentations, it's pretty easy. If you're doing external presentations, like you're bringing in business owners, what type of business are they doing? What problems are they experiencing? What's it likely to be for them? For the audience to be really effective, I think you have to consider their perspective. Let me tell you what happened to me one time. I was called in to do a presentation for an organization. They wanted me to do a big motivational speech, really. They were going through a lot of change and they wanted me to frame my presentation around change, but they wanted me to get people excited about change and help them to see that, change really moves us into a positive direction. I can do that. Okay. So I go in and the presentation was going to be like an hour. So I got, I had some good stuff for them about change and, I felt pretty positive about it. Really good organization, great reputation, good people, working with them, getting ready for it. Everything was great. I'm doing the presentation and about 20 minutes in, I finally, tuned into my audience, which I've learned from that too. You need to be tuning in a lot earlier. But when I actually tuned in and started really looking at the faces of the people in my audience, honestly, I saw two people who were full on crying. And everybody else they were not having as much fun as I was having at all. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? I stopped the presentation. I took a break. It was only an hour presentation. We didn't need a break, but something was wrong and I knew it. So I'm, trying to find somebody, because the weird thing is the person who I had talked with to arrange everything hadn't made herself known to me at this thing. I didn't see her there. And I go into the bathroom. Every woman in there is crying. And I'm like, okay, guys, what is going on? You got to tell me. Well, what they hadn't told me when I walked in the door is there had been a big layoff that very morning. And actually, the person who had been working with me was affected by the layoff, and they were all sent home like boom before the presentation. Nobody told me this. Here I am trying to motivate these guys and being all cheery and happy, and wondering, well, why aren't you cheery and happy? What a disaster, right? What a disaster. So really tuning into your audience and understanding what's going on with them, I think, is a very important part of making an effective presentation. There are ways to involve everyone, and I'll give you a few tips on that. The first thing is to never make it a one-on-one conversation. And I see a lot of presenters do this, especially when someone asks a question. I have a question, and the presenter will start walking towards that person to hear their question. Now, when you do that, what you're doing is you're excluding everybody else in your audience. You're making that one-on-one. Best thing you can do when someone asks a question is call on them and start backing away and go as far away from that person as you can physically manage. Watch out, don't trip over the cords or up the stairs. But go as far back as you can away from that person. As you step away, two magical things happen. One is the person starts speaking louder, which is great for the rest of the audience because they're thinking, you can't hear me, you're walking away from me. So they start talking louder and more emphatically, which is great because now you have a better chance that maybe the audience is going to hear. Even though you're going to repeat the question anyway, talk more about that later. The second thing that happens though is you're opening yourself to the entire room instead of making it a one-on-one conversation. So back away, and as you back away, you're opening yourself, you're opening the room, and now everybody's involved in that conversation, not just the person who asked the question. And when you answer the question, you don't make eye contact with just that person. You make eye contact with as many people as you can in answering that question, because it's an answer that applies to everyone. So that's one thing that you can do to try to keep people really involved and make everybody a part of it. I also just think it's really important to make your presentation a conversation as much as you can. Ask people, have you ever done this? That gives them a minute of reflection to think about it. That's another way to involve them. So make sure that you're there for your audience and that you're including them in the conversation. You're not just talking at them or talking to them. They're a part of this. And that means sometimes it's just nonverbal signals. It's like, have you ever done this? And, people nod and you say, oh yeah, me too. Or, people are shaking their heads. That doesn't happen to you? Well, it happened to me. Let me tell you what happened to me. So whatever you can do to acknowledge their presence and just know that they're there. One important technique for this is anchoring, making contact stick. That's what this making your contact stick with them, helping them to remember it. It's called anchoring. So that's a real way to engage your audience. There are a lot of techniques for this. Stories are probably the most popular, but also, analogies, those can help, metaphors, acronyms, activities, sometimes a little video. These are things that people relate to and can probably remember better after the session. Remember that video that she showed on that was like 2 minutes long? I want to show that to the rest. Whenever I show like a 2-minute video, I always have people asking me for where I got it, which is usually YouTube. But there's all kinds of great things out there. And those are the kind of things that stick with them. And of course, storytelling. Storytelling is huge. I've told you a few stories today already, and you'll probably remember those because they resonate. It helps us to relate, really, because you can see yourself in that story. You can see when that's happened to you, and remember how I set you up? Have you ever seen a boring presentation? Have you ever been in a situation like this? And then I tell you a story, and it helps you to really resonate, to remember, and to think about how to apply that going forward. So storytelling is a great technique, and we're going to do a whole session on storytelling as part of this series. In the meantime, a couple of important things for you on stories. First thing is to always make it relevant to your point. Never tell a story just to tell a story. As a matter of fact, as you'll see in a few slides, everything needs to be relevant. Everything needs to be relevant to your point. But make your stories relevant. You want them to be short, but not too short, because you got to cover all the bases. Too long, people start to lose it. And remember that there's a hero, the hero has a problem, and the problem takes steps to solve it. So there has to be a conflict in the story. Like I said, we'll talk a lot more about stories in upcoming session, but stories are a really great way to keep your audience engaged. And we have to keep it interesting. We have to keep it interesting for our audience. So that means keeping it succinct. That's what someone said in the chat a while ago, keeping it succinct, not too much information, really only 3 or 4 points. And there's actually a formula for that. And the formula goes like this. Most experts say that for every point, you should allow 10 minutes. So if you have a 45-minute presentation, that would be probably 3 points. That's 30 minutes. And then 15 minutes will include your open, your close, and your question answer. So 3 or 4 points is going to be the normal for most presentations, but about 10 minutes per point. Now, this is different than training. In training, you're going to have a different situation, of course. But if you're making a presentation, where kind of like what we're doing right now, usually 3 or 4 points is about right, about 10 minutes per point. Memorize the opening of your presentation. I'd recommend that. And the close. The reason I recommend memorizing your open is because it's really important to be interesting to your audience, that you grab their attention right away. The mistake I see from some presenters is they start with, "Hi, I'm happy to be here today. How is everybody?" You have 7 seconds to make an impression on that audience as to whether you're going to be interesting, and you just blew it by saying, "Hi, how are you?" So I started with, ever done a presentation? So I started with something that, I could really get you interested in right away, because that's why we're here today, is talk about effective presentations. So it's very important that you open in a way that makes your audience go, "I'm interested. I want to hear more." Not that you just start talking about the weather. Wow, this is some weather we're having, right? No. Your opening needs to start with a bang. Like, okay, what are we going to talk about? You got to get them interested right away. The reason I recommend thinking about that and maybe even memorizing it, or at least practicing it more than any other part of your presentation, is because that's when we're most nervous. So if you can get started and you have it memorized, so you know what to start saying, you'll find that within just probably a couple of minutes, the nerves will start to dissolve and you'll be much more comfortable. So memorizing it can help you from just standing there and going, blah, blah, forgetting what you're going to talk about. One way I've seen people open that's pretty effective and might work for you, especially if you're nervous, is to open by saying nothing. Just stand there and look powerful. Or maybe smile. Just stand there for just a few seconds. What happens when you do that? Silence is very powerful. People who were chatting or talking or thinking about other things know that you've just been introduced and you're supposed to be talking and you're not. Now I'm interested. I'm looking up like, what's going on? Why isn't the speaker saying anything? I expected them to say, "Hi, how are you today? I'm glad to be here." And they didn't say anything. So it's an attention grabber, really. And that little pause gives you a minute to take a breath and go, "I'm ready." Okay. And then start your open. So that's another powerful way to open. But the important thing about the open is this is going to determine whether I'm interested or not. So you need to really think about how you're going to open. Now I'm going to just qualify that I said, I might memorize my open, but I don't really recommend memorization as a rule, especially for the rest of the presentation. And the reason I don't is because I really think effective presentations come from your expertise and they come from your heart. If you know your stuff, you know your material, then I think before the presentation, what you can do is you can do your opening. You can say, here, these are the 3 main points I'm going to discuss, and the sub points under those will be this, and this is what I'm going to do in my close. And that's really all the rehearsal you need when you get really close to that point in the presentation. Now, before that, you rehearse it, you go through it, you get the timing down and everything, but the closer you get, I don't think it's a matter of memorization. When I see people who have memorized, they stumble because they can't remember what word's supposed to be next because they tried to memorize it. So I'm not a big fan of memorizing. And closing with purpose is also really important because remember, you're going to be telling them what is that next step. So you want to keep them interested, not just when the presentation's finished, but afterwards. Afterwards, you want them to still be interested. So that closing is important too. And the close, the same thing. A story works great for a close. Statistics, same thing in the opening, maybe a moment of silence. But whatever you can do to keep that interesting and have them be interested when the presentation's over. And speaking of effective presentations, and keeping your audience interested, everything has to be relevant. There's no room for goofing off in presentations, really. Now, people, I've seen people come back from a break and do some kind of fun activity. For some people, it's fun. For other people, it's you're wasting my time. I'll be back with you when you get serious because I don't have any need for this. So if you do any kind of an activity, any kind of visual, any story, a joke, anything needs to be relevant to your presentation. It needs to be relevant to your main points. If it's not relevant, you need to leave it out completely. People don't have time to waste, so make it relevant. And also in keeping it interesting, here's another area where people have an issue: questions and answers. This is where a lot of people lose interest. You noticed today when Brett started, he said, you can put your questions in chat and we'll hold them, until I'm ready for them, which is a great way. There are some presentations where you want to be able to take questions during the presentation. That's up to you. Either way you handle it, though, there's a couple of key things. First thing is if you get a question, you always need to repeat it. You need to repeat it because, believe me, somebody in the audience didn't hear it. The minute I raise my hand to ask the presenter a question, there are several people out here who go, oh, this doesn't relate to me. I don't need this. Let me check my mail. So they didn't hear that question, which means they've lost interest, which means you lost them, which is a problem. So you need to bring them back in by using that technique where you pull away, make sure you're including your whole audience, eye contact, but repeat the question and answer the question as succinctly as possible if you can with bullet points. If the question is not relevant, don't answer it. If the question is not relevant, you don't want to lose your audience because you're answering a question one person has that's not related to what you're talking about. But you also want to make that person feel valued. We always want to make people feel valued. So what to do in that situation is say, I'm not sure how that ties in right now. It may come in later. If I don't answer your question during this presentation, please come up and see me afterwards and let's chat about that. So they feel valued. It's not like you're saying, that's a stupid question. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Show them that you value them and give them a way out. Give them a way out. But don't waste your time on trying to answer something that's not related because one person in the audience is trying to take you probably off topic. And a lot of times, not always, but there are people in our audience who are attention seekers. And sometimes they will seek attention in this way. They will ask a question that's not related to kind of throw you off. Or maybe they're just thinking about something else at the same time. It's not always a bad thing. It may be something that's closely related, but be picky about which questions you answer. Don't take the whole audience off topic and get people who are no longer interested in what you're talking about because you're answering something that's not related. The other big mistake we make with questions and answers is we save them until the very end. And that's a disaster. Have you ever been in this situation? Okay, let me answer your questions. And what happens? You know that the presentation is done. You have no questions. You're done. You're ready to go. Kind of hungry. You want that break. Let me go get a cup of coffee, whatever. So you tune out. You start putting your stuff away. You're ready to go. You're just waiting for them to say we're done so that you can get out the door. Unless you're that person, and you know there are those people who just pack it up and leave anyway, which is even more disruptive. So you don't save it for the very end. You do it before you're closing. And what you do is say to your audience, before we close, what questions do you have? So they know we're not done. We're going to pause for questions and then we're going to close. So you save your closing until after the question answer period. Remember, this is all about keeping your audience interested. And if you give them an excuse not to be interested, you lose them. And it's very hard for them to come back to you once you've lost them. So do your questions and answers, and then your close. And in the series, we're going to talk real in depth in one of the future sessions about those transitions and how to do that transition to close, how to introduce that you're about to close, but first we're going to do Q&A, and then we're going to close. We'll be talking about that more in depth if that interests you. All right, let's see. Oh, and one other thing on questions. If you don't know the answer, admit it. There are two things you can do if you don't know the answer. First thing is you can say, boy, that is a good question. I want to do some research on that. I'm going to see what I can find. Drop me your card afterward and I'll let you know what I find out. But I'm not sure really how to answer that. That's fine. The other thing you can do, which is risky, but actually pretty cool, if it works well, which for me it usually does, I'll say, wow, that's a really good question. I don't know. Does anybody in here know? Because you know there's probably somebody out there who knows. And that's another way to include the audience and keep them interested. And you know, sometimes I'll get the answer and sometimes not, but it's a good way to keep your audience engaged, which we talked about. You know, keep it interesting. Like, wow, she's asking us. Cool. So it's worked well for me, but I know it's a little risky, especially if you're a newer presenter. That might be a little more than you can handle. And if that's the case, just say, that's a good question. Let me do some research and I'll try to find out, you know, but don't make something up because people are going to see through that and that's going to really ruin your credibility. All right, so that's Q&A. And that's how to keep your audience interested. So now let's talk about how to organize your presentation. It really is important that you have a structure for your presentation, and that as you're developing your content, which is another topic we'll be talking about in depth, is you know how to arrange it so that people will be able to follow you all the way through. So there's a structure, and here's how it works. You open, and then you have a transition. There's a transition to your main point. For me, my transition was when I showed you the vowels, and I talked about, you know, vowels keep it from being boring, right? You know, when it gets boring. So that was my transition to the first main point, which for me was action, right? Then there's a transition to the second point. And speaking of this, here's the next thing, right? Remember that? All right. So we do that. And I did 3 points here, but you can see it becomes repeatable. Then you have your closing transition, which is where you're saying, all right, let's just review what we've learned. And we're going to stop and take some questions and answers, and then we'll close, you know, so you do a little transition to your close, then you have your close. And this is a repeatable structure. Every presentation you do, you should be using the same structure over and over. And then a big important part of structure for your audience is helping them to see where you're going. Because, you know, I talked about that in effective presentations when I was talking about what makes it effective. It's like, sometimes it's like all over the place, right? Like, what are they talking about? So if you can help them to see where you're going with this, and we actually call that a roadmap. Here was the roadmap for this presentation. This is your roadmap. You know that I'm going to do A, E, I, O, U, and right now I'm on O. So you got one more to go, right? So this is good for your audience because they want to know, where are we in this thing and where are you going with this? And they're able to follow along, you know. Now there's all kinds of roadmaps and you've seen them, you know. Sometimes people will do things like, okay, let's see if I can think of a couple. Oh, how about 3 Ps for amazing presentations? All right, 3 Ps for amazing presentations. And then what I do is I come up with 3 main points to start with P, so that I can say, okay, the first P, the first thing for effective presentations, our first P is going to be prepare. And our second one will be pray. And the third one will be P before it starts. Whatever. So the 3 Ps, and that's good because that's memorable and people know there's going to be 3 Ps, and when they're done with the 3 Ps, all right, we're going to be wrapping up. So that works. Sometimes an acronym, you see a lot of people doing acronyms, like I'm going to show you the how to do effective presentations with the acronym SHOW, and then you put words with SHOW or whatever you do. Honestly, this sounds easier than it is. If you've ever tried to do this, I probably spent way too much time just coming up with this AIOU thing to come up with some way to make a roadmap, because I couldn't make an acronym that was relevant. And you know how I feel about relevancy now. So, I didn't want to just give you an acronym that wasn't relevant. It's like, how are you going to remember that that's related to a speech? If I just give you this weird thing, or I make up this whole set of letters that, how are you going to remember those letters? So it takes a little time to do this, to figure it out. Like I decided to do the 3 Ps of presentations. Now I got to figure out 3 words. So honestly, I spend time on these sites, so give me verbs starting with P. So I Google those kind of things to try to find it out. But creating some kind of a roadmap, a plan for your presentation that your audience can understand really helps them to follow you and to be more engaged and more interested in what you're doing, and puts that focus back on your audience. So this was the roadmap for this presentation. Any presentation you do, you need some kind of a plan, so first you have your structure, but then you have how to show that to your audience so that they can follow and so that it can be memorable, right? All right, so your roadmap. So this is another part of being organized. And of course, we have a session on being organized too. All right, and the U in AEIOU, I took a little license here, but you focused. It always has to be focused on your audience. You have to make it personal for your audience. I admit that I Googled organizations and people just Google them to try to find pictures. This picture was an SBDC conference that I attended, and this was on their website as one of the pictures from the conference. And to do an SBDC session, I would try to find SBDC pictures. If I'm doing them for your organization, I try to make my pictures relevant to whatever your organization is. If you're construction, then my pictures need to show people doing construction. If I'm in healthcare, my pictures need to show people in healthcare. I change my pictures for whatever audience that I'm going to be in front of. I need to research that audience and know about them and make them relevant. Sometimes I have trouble with the pictures because it's like, I do a lot of casual small business audiences, and the pictures are all of these people in, shiny suits and, really high tech business clothes. And I'm like, those pictures aren't going to relate to my audience. They need to be more casual. And sometimes if I'm doing like a big organization, the casual pictures don't work. It's all about making it really focused to your audience so that they relate. They don't spend time in their head thinking things that they don't need to be thinking about, like, oh, those people don't look like us. Geez, we would never wear things like that to work. So do whatever you can to make it really relate to your audience and make it focused on them. Do your research up front. Remember that everything you do is really about making that experience right for your audience. This person that, with their shirt, I modified their shirt to put a little tag on it that says, I know, because that's what you're facing with your audiences. Your people come to your presentations and they already know a lot. Some of them will know more than you. I always have people in my audiences that know more than me. I always have people who are smarter than me and, have been through it from different experiences. And what you have to learn is to use that, not to insult people like, you don't know this. I'm here. I'm the one that knows everything. I think it really helps to think of yourself more of a facilitator of knowledge and to help people transform their knowledge, because they have all this experience. Your adult learners, they have all of this experience from their past, and you're just trying to help them to reshape that information so that they can take that next step, so that they can take action on what you're doing. So review with them, involve them. Like that's why I said, it's so important that you engage them, that they're interested. And now that they're involved, that it's really focused on them. So do your best to keep it interactive, even if it's just, like right now, this is really challenging because I don't see all of you, but I'm talking to you as if I do see you, and I'm trying to give you that affirmation that I see you, that I hear you, that I'm with you. It's not as easy when you have a live audience. It is easier, especially if you consider, we're just having a conversation. So remember that these people need to be a part of what you're doing. So you want to make the information stick. You want to use visuals to help them. Anything that you can do to really to focus on your audience. And there's some things you can do with wording as well that really helps. Here's an example. This is a very different question. When I say, how many of you have been nervous about presenting, and people raise their hands? Okay, that's a real different question than this one. Look at the difference. Have you ever been nervous about presenting? Do you see the difference here? And this one, I'm talking to everybody. And it's very easy for me as an individual to opt out of this. I hate it when those presenters play those stupid games where, they're going to ask us 10 questions. Stand up if you have ever been nervous about presenting. It's like, that gives me a few more minutes to look at my email while they get it together. It doesn't include me, right? But this one, have you ever been nervous about presenting? Now you're talking directly to me. That's different. That's a different question. They call this the hallway test. And the way the hallway test works is this. If I'm in the hallway with just, one of you, if I'm in the hallway with Paula, and I ask a question like this, how many of you have been nervous about presenting? And she's going to be like, huh? She's going to be looking around going, how many of you? I'm the only one here, right? That's how we want to talk to our audience, like they're the only one here. So if I say to Paula, have you ever been nervous about presenting? See the difference there? Now I'm talking directly to her. Have you ever actually been in a situation where you felt like a presenter was talking directly to you? Isn't that magical when that happens? Like, they make that eye contact with you and you feel like they're talking to me. They know me. This is really interesting. I'm interested. I'm engaged. That makes your presentation much more effective. So there are many things you can do. When you give people this question, have you ever been nervous about presenting? And then you pause. Now I'm going, yeah, I remember I'm almost nervous about presenting, especially when I present in front of my peers. And, they're having these thoughts that are directly related to your content and directly where you want to go with them. They're not thinking, oh, look, half the room's been nervous. No, they're thinking, oh, she's talking to me. I remember when I was nervous. So that's a really great technique to remember is, talk to the individual. You're talking to everybody, but you're talking just to me. And that's what eye contact is about too. Making that eye contact when you're talking just to me. Now, you will hear in speech classes, and some presenters will tell you what to do here. If you are nervous about making eye contact, you just don't think you can do it. That just you can't imagine people naked. That's just, so they'll tell you after they tell you to try to imagine everybody naked, which I just don't think is a good idea because I think that would really distract me. Yep, I'm distracted anyway. So they tell you just to look over the heads of the audience, just look over their heads, like look at the wall, and people will think that you're looking at someone towards the back, that's bull crap. That's not good advice. You need to find some people in the audience that, some friendly faces. And the way you can do that is try to connect with them before you start presenting, or maybe you have a friend in the audience or just somebody that, they just draw your attention for some reason, but make that eye contact and make it around the room, because this is all about, you're talking to me. You're not talking to everybody, even though you are. You're talking to me. And when you make that eye contact with me, that makes all the difference for me. Makes all the difference. So be very focused on the audience. Give them time to reflect about their own experiences so that they can really get your message and understand what they're going to do going forward with what they're learning. So let's look at what we've learned today here. We have our presentation must-dos to make effective presentations. We're going to make it actionable. We're going to make sure they know what to do next. We're going to make it engaging so that they're a part of the presentation, a part of the conversation. They're going to be interested. We're not going to do anything that's going to take them off track. We're going to keep them involved, keep them interested the entire time. We're going to have a plan of how it's organized. That's going to help us as presenters because we know what's coming next. It's going to be open, main point 1, main point 2, main point 3, close transition, close, boom, we're ready. And it's going to help our audience because they're going to be able to follow along with us in a structured way to understand what we're presenting. So we're going to use an acronym or vowels or maybe the 3 Ps or whatever. You know, the funny thing is right now, if I asked you like in a live situation, what are the 3 Ps, you'd probably remember. You'd probably remember because I made them kind of funny. So that's what we're hoping for. And we're going to make it you focused, everything that we can to make people feel like this is really about me. This is about what I do. This is about my job. She's talking to me or he's talking to me. That's what we want to do with you focus. So as we talk about what we've learned and we get ready to think about our next step, what we're going to do next, let me just pause before I close and ask you, what questions do you have? So do we have questions?
Thank you for that, Lorna. If you do, please put them in there. We don't have any questions currently there, but I believe that it would be prepare, pray, and pee. Yes, you're right. I mean,
you remember.
I love that about your presentations in general, Ms. Kibbe, because one of the things that you do is you bring it all full circle, and we always walk away with the important stuff. And today, the vowels and the 3 Ps are definitely going away with me. So, you know, even though that was just an example, but if anybody has any questions, please take a moment to go ahead and do it before we close, as Ms. Kibbe said, and we'll be happy to address those. I just wanted to ask you a question about the audience themselves. You said you study them a lot before you go, or not necessarily a lot, but you want to know who you're speaking with or to. Mm-hmm. And so can you give us a little more insight when somebody, like, for example, a lot of times we have a presentation where you prepared it and you know the information really well, and you're presenting to these different types of groups. And mm-hmm. after a while, maybe to you, it becomes redundant, but you don't want to go straying too far, do you, from your message? But how do you adapt that to the different people? Do you have a little thing in your pocket you pull out and say, this is how I adapt, you know?
I feel very strongly about this. I rarely present the same thing twice. It may be the main points of the structure are in place, but I really do my best to modify it for my audience. I'm thinking the entire time, who am I speaking to right now? Who is this relevant for? And I do a lot of Googling, honestly. I'll Google, you know, if I know, like one time I did a presentation for a company called Turbine Generator Maintenance. This is so far out of my realm of understanding that I'm like, what? And it's a bunch of, it's an organization that repairs these big turbine generators in huge factories. And I didn't even know what a turbine generator was. Boy, was that a learning curve for me. But, you know, I learned right away just by researching what do turbine generator mechanics do, asking Google, like, I really got to change this up, you know, because I can't go in here with people in business suits in my pictures and, you know, talking about organizations. That's not going to fly. You know, this is a completely different culture. And it's up to me to really understand that going in, you know. So I really modify it for every audience. I use Google a lot. I ask questions, you know, I ask stupid questions like, okay, what do people in office supply stores see as their problems? Google's great. It'll answer any question for you. Or Siri, you know, hey Siri, what's the biggest problem we see with people who operate pet stores? And it'll give me a whole bunch of stuff, you know. And then I use I
found this on the web for what's the biggest problem for people who operate pet stores. Check it out.
Bravo.
You know what I mean?
Bravo.
Thank you, Siri. Oh, the dark side of pet shops. Ooh, I need to read that. Anyway. Now, you can't take all that information to be absolute, but it really does give you a lot of perspective and a lot of things to think about. And if you can find a contact person, hopefully one that they don't lay off a few minutes before you speak, but someone who can you can ask questions, ask information like, what do you think I should be aware of? What's going on with you guys right now? What's changing for you? What's causing you stress? That. So, and a lot of times I think, because we are the experts in what we're talking about, we do already have a lot of information, which is good. Your business, your businesses, and what's going on with your people. And if you're speaking to a similar audience, that really gives you a leg up, in preparing your material. But I think it's so important to really tune in to the people you're talking to. I never deliver anything off the shelf. You'll never get a presentation from me that I delivered the same way to that audience last week.
Thank you. No, that's great. That's good information too. And just something that you hit. I haven't seen any other questions, guys. Please jump in if you want. I know she's really good about giving us all the information complete. But the only last thing that I have as an ad, being a speaker myself in the past, one of the things that I noticed you touched on that I found very effective for those of us who are uncomfortable speaking to people on or especially to an audience, is getting with the people right before. And I've noticed that sometimes one of the ways, and I'd like to just hear your input on it, one of the best things that I found is going to the break, getting that cup of coffee or whatever, Danish, even though you're probably not going to eat it because you're nervous, and meeting somebody, finding out what Lorna does, or what Paula does, and what department they work in whatever organization. And then later on, whenever you feel like you've lost the audience for some reason, I usually pick on Lorna and say, Lorna would know all about that coming from our accounting department, right? And just tie it in somehow. But do you think that's a good way to bring the audience back if you do lose them, is my question? Because
I think that's an absolutely great way, because the people, if you meet even if you just met them a few minutes before, they feel like they know you, like they have a friend, you acknowledge them. I just did a presentation in Orlando last week where I did this, and I met like 3 people in the room that I didn't know. And I was writing down their names as I talked to them, because during the presentation I said, and Jim was telling me just before this presentation that, and it's like, and he feels so valued, he felt like, look at me,
I'm Jim.
And everybody else is like, oh, she really knows, like she's really interested. And I think that people feel better about you as a presenter and are better able to accept information you're giving them because they feel good towards you, like you're one of us, one of us, we like you. So I think that's really important. And that P thing, I would just like to say, is real. Because if you've ever been doing a presentation and you need to go during the presentation and you can't without dismissing the entire audience, that's really rough, man.
And on that note, we don't have any other questions at this time. If you would like to close so that we can
I would
effectively reach that last P.
All right. I want you to take that one next step. And I'm suggesting this for your next step. Put these dates on your calendar. Go ahead and get registered for these so that you can get more in-depth information about about how to do presentations. Like I said, the book is available on Amazon, and it's called How to Be a Better Presenter, Becoming a Better Presenter. So that's available on Amazon. There's a lot of information there for you. You do presentations every day. This is a really important part of what you do. Don't be in that 51% of people who gave up a career advancement opportunity because they didn't feel like their skills were good enough. You've got control over this. You can do this. So do it. That's your next step.
Fantastic.
All right.
Well, thank you for that very much. And there's a couple people that just wanted to say thank you in there to your presentation. So make sure you pay attention to that. They're saying thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We're right on time here.
Yes, we are.
All right.
Very good. If you don't mind,
thanks, everybody.
The 1 second, if you don't mind, I'd like to let everybody know, as she said, put those on your calendar. And if you notice right here, We have a few, how to maximize your content marketing is coming up as well with Ashley Cook on September 22nd. And on the 28th, creating a bankable loan presentation on the 28th. The 29th, designing your presentation with guess who? Lorna Kibbe. That was on that list. So make sure you go onto the website and sign up for that. And if you want to get more information, go to the SBDC website for more of that and all of the other upcoming, continually changing webinars and other ways to gain some training at no cost to you. Speaking of that, we want to thank some people real quick. We want to, of course, thank the Small Business Administration, the state of Texas, North Texas SBDC Regional Office, and North Central Texas College for making all of this possible for everybody. And we really appreciate it. Again, Ms. Kibbe, you're always welcome in our neighborhood because you always bring us great content and we appreciate it. And we thank everybody for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you next time.